All right, today we're going to talk about basic reproduction and breeding systems within a meat goat operation. Reproduction and breeding systems, again, a basic reproduction today, we're going to talk a little bit about, the does or the female side of the operation, bucks or the males, age at puberty for both, and things that you should look out for when we're looking for, working with meat goat operation. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about breeding systems. We're going to discuss a little bit about how goats are seasonal breeders. We'll also talk about the different types of breeding seasons that we can use and matching the systems with the resources. First of all, let's start off talking about the does or the females, sometimes referred to as nannies. Does typically reach puberty 7 to 10 months. Sometimes they can reach a little bit earlier, but 7 to 10 months is kind of the average for a female. When we look at a doe for breeding, even though, let's say, she reaches puberty at 10 months of age, she still needs to be somewhere between 60 to 75% of her adult weight. Meaning, if you think her adult weight's 150 pounds, she needs to be 75% of that before she is allowed to breed and kid out. You can breed these animals. Like I said, they come into puberty at 7 months of age. You can't actually breed them to kid as yearlings or 1 year old. Again, we have to go back to that size thing. If they're big enough to actually kid out at 1 year old, that's not a problem. But the size, typically if we're going to do that and push them to be that big at that age, then the feed cost or the economic cost of doing that usually outweighs it. So it's usually a little better to maybe wait a little longer and not have them kid out as a year old, but they can if that works for you. A mature goat can kid until they're 7 or 8. I've had myself had females stay in the herd till they're 12 years old. As long as their body allows them to do it and they can do it economically and efficiently, it's not a problem to keep a mature age doe around. But typically at 7 to 8, we start to see things break down, like their udder systems, or maybe their pasterns and back legs, where they're not able to get around as much, and therefore not maybe as efficient as when they were younger. Now, because of their short gestation period, 150 days, goats can have 3 kid crops in 2-year period. But in my experience and looking at this, that 3 kid crops in 2 years puts a strain on resources from the standpoint of marketing. If you've developed a marketing plan for a certain time of the year, that's only going to be good once out of every 3 kid crops. You're also consider your resources. If you're built your breeding plan around your forage resources, that's only going to be good 1 out of 3 years, and so you'll have to change that up as you go along. So just realize, if you want to have the goats to make that 3 kid crops in 2 years, you're going to have 3 different plans in action at the same time. Meat goats, especially the meat breeds that we're using these days, typically are seasonal breeders. Seasonal breeders just means that there's times of year that when these goats do not come into heat and do not settle and become pregnant. This is not always the case. There are always exceptions to the rules. But as a general rule, goats do not like to breed during the summertime. So the typical breeding season is, usually August may be a little bit, but I always say September to about April. And like I say, sometimes we can get May, but June, July, and August, the hot months of the year, seem to have a hard time for the does to come into estrus or come into heat and get bred. Now, you can manipulate this a little bit in using light treatments or actually hormone treatments such as cedars and lutulase and stuff to kind of trick their bodies into coming into estrus and then breeding them that way. Typically, the expense of some of these programs outweighs the benefits of getting them bred. Now, also too, you can use a buck maybe to stimulate estrus or a heat cycle in a goat. But again, it's a little difficult during the summertime months. When I talk about the heat or the estrus cycle in a goat, normally, like I said, occurs from August till April. Peak time for a goat, which means the time that they're usually ready to get bred, is from October to January. This estrus cycle happens every 18 to 22 days. And so that's the time period, and it's from during that standing heat. Every 22 days they're going to have an estrus or a standing heat, which lasts 12 to 36 hours, which is the time for which the buck breeds them and they're pregnant. And then the gestation period, how long they're pregnant before they have that kid, approximately 150 days. We always say plus or minus 10 days on either end of it, but just to be on the safe side, but 150 days is the rule of thumb. Signs of the heat, and the thing about a goat operation is that so it's not as simple to determine when a female is in heat as when compared to cattle or swine or even sheep. But same things you can look for: tail wagging. Goats will be out in the pasture, that'll tail be just what we call flagging. They're waving it back and forth. It's almost like to call attention to themselves. Maybe their vulva is a little swollen. If there are other goats in the pen, they're trying to mount that goat or ride that goat from place to place. That's another indication that they may be in heat. Now, also too, if you're in, if they have kids on them, maybe their milk production is decreased a little bit if lactating. But also the increase in activity, they're riding the fence or rubbing up against the fences, looking for that male goat is typically a good sign. Let's switch over to bucks just a little bit. Bucks actually reach puberty a little earlier than the doe kids. That's the reason why we talk about the need to either separate the males from the females at about 4 months old or right after weaning to prevent unwanted breedings. Now, the other way to do that is you can castrate the males and then keep the wether goats, the castrated males, in with the doe goats and not have any unwanted pregnancies. Now, you can use a buck kid at as little as 8 to 10 months old. The thing you have to worry about when dealing with buck kids at that age is that you don't overbreed them or breed them to too many does. And sometimes maybe size. If he's not quite as big as some of the females you want bred, he might have a little issue there as well. But the rule of thumb is usually only one goat per month of age. So if the little doe buck kid is 10 months old, 10 does would be about the limit that you need to breed him to. Before the breeding season, any breeding season with bucks, what you should try to do is do a breeding soundness exam or a BSE exam. And let's talk about the BSE exam a little bit. What is exactly the BSE exam? It is a physical exam where we look at the buck, their structural soundness. We see if there's any abnormalities in the glands or the organs. We'll maybe look at his scrotal circumference a little bit, make sure that they're of proper size, 26 to 36 centimeters. Again, there's no standards been developed for a goat operation, but we kind of use that 26 to 36 centimeters as a rule of thumb. And then the other important thing is we're going to take a semen sample and measure the amount of semen or sperm cells that are in that sample. We want that to be 80% or above. Anything under 80% is a little bit, I'm not saying that he couldn't breed a goat, but may possibly miss some. So by doing this exam, we can check and make sure that the sperm count is okay. And again, check their libido and basically check their sex drive to make sure that they're still interested in being a buck for breeding purposes. All right, let's switch gears now. We've talked about does and bucks. Let's talk about, the breeding season, okay? I'm going to tell you that you're going to want a defined breeding season. Basically means you're going to have a set time period that you want the goats to breed in, okay? Typically, this time period is somewhere between 60 and 90 days. 60 days is the shorter season. 90 days, allows us a little bit more flexibility. But even in a 60-day breeding season, a female goat should come into heat or estrus at least 3 times. So therefore, that would give the buck 3 opportunities. If they're not bred in those 3 times, then there's either something wrong with the buck or something wrong with the doe. A breeding season should not be 365 days in a year. We need to pull that buck out. By doing this, it allows us to help our marketing plan as far as selling uniform kid crops. And all our kids are kind of uniform in size, uniform in age, and then also it helps us match up our resources to our production systems. Now, your breeding season can be determined by several different things. And it's up to you individually to decide when you want it. Some people look at, when they intend to market their goats. And then other people look at what is best for their resources as far as the weather, the time of the year. You go further north, they're not going to want to have kids or have babies in the winter time. Forage availability, if we're kidding out in the summertime, sometimes forage If it's a drought season, might not be a little forage may not be available, or maybe in the late fall, early winter. Maybe the management. You don't want to manage certain times of the year. You don't do that, or time availability, which kind of goes back to management. You have more time during one time of the year than you have the other time. And I've kind of got two examples for determining your breeding season. And the first example I got here is you've decided you want a kid when the weather is pleasant. There's plenty of forage available for the nursing does and kids. So we've looked at that, and we're going to breed in December. Breeding is not a problem typically in December. I've already talked about that's the time of year when does are pretty fertile and are receptive to being bred. We kind of go with that 150 days, that gestation period. That means we're going to kid out in May or late April, May. If we look at that, no weather problems during the kidding season. May typically is a very mild month, especially here in Oklahoma, so there shouldn't be any kidding problems. We go another 90 days, 90 to 100 days. That's our typical weaning season, when we're going to wean. That means we're going to sell August, September at weaning. During that 90 to 100 days, should be plenty of summer forage available for those mama goats to eat, and even for the baby goats as they grow to eat. The only problem with this plan, August, September is not the best time in the marketing season to sell. Typically, that's near the low end of the marketing period, or our goats are the market's trending downward and getting cheaper. That's one idea. Just kind of look and trying to match things up. Let's say we want to change our mind and say, we don't want to market in the downward trending period. We want to look at maybe the high time of the year, the best time. We want to hit that seasonal high price, which in Oklahoma, February, March is the typical time period. And so I'm going to back into this one just a little bit. We're going to sell in March at weaning. That's our high point of the market. We back up that 90 to 100 days. Now we're going to kid in December. Okay, that's the time. Not the best time of the year to kid. In Oklahoma, we could have 4 inches of ice and 80 degrees days, depending on what the December is. But there could be an issue with kidding out that time of the year. Also, too, in that December to March time period, if your forage base is a summer grass program, it's not going to be a whole lot of forage available. So that means that you're going to have to put some forage or some feed into those animals to make them perform the way you want them to perform. Back up that 150 days, it tells us now we're going to have to breed in July. I've already indicated that July is not a very good time. I'm not saying you can't get the goats bred in July, but conception rates may not be the highest. So you have two plans here. One of them sells at the low end of the market. One of them, production's is not a problem. The other one, we're going to sell at the high end of the market, but we may not have as many to sell. So you've got to kind of match up your resources and your goals for your operation to match up with your breeding season. I show an example of a gestation table. This kind of lets us know when we need to put the bucks in and to pull the bucks out for time frame. And it's just quite simple. We take a date and we add 150 days to it. And if I was wanting to kid put my the bucks in November 1, I can expect my kids to start my does to start kidding out March 31st. If I didn't want any babies later than April, the 1st of May, I would need to pull the buck out by the 1st of December. Gestation tables are easily found. In one place you can find one is the Oklahoma Basic Meat Goat Manual. It lays it all out day by day, and this helps you plan your breeding seasons. Let's talk a little bit about determining pregnancy rates. There are a couple of different methods that we can use to help us determine if a doe is pregnant or not before she actually has the kid. It's not as easy as it is with cattle. Cattle, we can do rectal palpations to determine if the animal is pregnant. With goats, we're not able to do that rectal palpation, so we have to do different methods. The first method that can be used is the ultrasound method. We can use the ultrasound as little as 35 days. After 35 days bred, they can determine the pregnancies. But typically, the problem with the ultrasound technique is that the availability of it. Typically, it's usually performed by a veterinarian, and not all veterinarians use ultrasound to help determine pregnancy. And then sometimes the cost of it, it can be anywhere from $5 to $15 a head. The new way to determine pregnancy is blood protein determination. It's basic. It's real simple. It's a blood test. We pull the blood on the animals. We have to send that blood sample off to a lab. They then do a protein analysis on it. They're looking for certain proteins that indicate that the animal is pregnant. Then they send you the results. Again, you can do this as little as 30 to 45 days bred, and this you can do on the farm. All you have to be able to do is to draw the blood from the animal. You do have to have the supplies available, the blood tubes and the needles, and then ship it to a qualified lab to determine that. The cost of this is ranging all over from about $5 to about $8 to $10 to do this. Now, like I said, by determining pregnancy early, producers, you can make a decision to cull earlier. If your breeding season is over and she's not pregnant, then you can actually send her, cull her and send her to the market, and then replace her with something else, or actually make an alternate breeding plan for her if she's not bred. You don't want to wait a whole year before you get a kid or kids out of that doe. Now we're going to switch gears and let's talk a little bit about breeding systems. There's 3 breeding systems I'm going to talk about today, and one is inbreeding. Inbreeding is simply the mating offspring and parents or siblings. Let's say you breed a doe to a buck, and that buck is her father. That would be inbreeding. Okay. Now, inbreeding is used used quite a bit in purebred operations or in other types of operations when they're trying to improve upon the genetic material of one certain genetic line, because they're looking at the good genetic traits and hoping by mating good genetics back to the same type of good genetics, they can double up on that genetic strain and get even better animal. And this can work, but also too, if those animals have a genetic fault, you're also doubling up on that, and that sometimes can manifest itself and cause you more problems. Line breeding is kind of a different form of inbreeding. It's still your mating related animals, but maybe they're not as closely related as dad or as dad and daughter. Maybe it's a granddad and to granddaughter, or maybe 2 generations away to the next generation. It's still, like I said, we're still trying to get that good genetic traits and build up on those, but again, it's not near as close as what inbreeding is. A kind of a running joke in the industry is if you breed 2 animals that are related together and it works, it's line breeding. If it doesn't work, it's inbreeding. So kind of the running joke. The one breeding systems that most people or most commercial goat operations should look at is just simply crossbreeding. Now, a lot of times when we say crossbreeding, people think that I'm talking about the different breeds of goats, like maybe bring a boar to a Kiko, boar to a Savannah, or boar to a Spanish. And that's not always the case. You can actually do crossbreeding within, let's just take, for example, the boar goats. All you're doing is you're trying to find 2 different genetic lines and mate them together, and that offspring, it should be better than the 2 parents. So that's why we're looking at mating these 2 animals together. Now, a lot of times we can go outside the breed and, like say, boar to Kiko, and that mating of that F1 offspring should be better than the 2 parents, because the genetic material when we crossbreed and the offspring typically are a lot better. It's typically the opposite of line breeding. These animals are not anywhere closely related. If we want a uniform kid crop, we could actually use line breeding, and we could maybe get some good choices with that. As we go through the line breeding process. Crossbreeding, on the other hand, it would be a good first cross, but then if we kept going along that same lines, it would get poor. The results would get poor, not what we quite wanted on down the line. If we wanted the supreme show goat, line breeding. Poor in most cases, but sometimes they do hit home runs in line breeding. A lot of times the inbreeding is used more in the show goats, and then crossbreeding. A lot of the good show goats nowadays are being crossbred with other breeds of goats. Again, different genetic strains, and again, good if they can get non-uniform. Rapid growth, meat kids, line breeding is going to get you moderate at best. Crossbreeding is going to get you the way to go if you're trying to add growth to those animals.